Hello guys, welcome back to this YouTube channel. My name is Lona and I'm a planning and evolutions engineer. And as a planning and evolutions engineer, I touch on almost every aspect of IT. So this is a YouTube channel where we simply share IT information in general, information that we feel will be useful for you in your IT career. So remember to check on my previous videos. I know there's something that you'll definitely be interested in. And remember to share to your IT friends out there. Remember to like my videos and remember to maybe leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about my videos. Let me know what you think about the previous videos. And if you have anything that you think I should talk about, kindly also leave it in the comment section. So today, guys, I want us to talk about DevOps engineering. Who is a DevOps engineer and what are some of the things that are required for a DevOps engineer to know? So I'll try as much as possible to give you like an end-to-end journey of a DevOps engineer. I'll just give like specific scenarios because DevOps is a practice and there's so many things, so many practices that you can apply out there. But I'll try as much as possible to give you like a general end-to-end journey of a DevOps engineer. When you talk about DevOps, remember it's a combination of two words: development and operations. So there's that continuous journey of from when the code is being developed to finally when the application is being deployed in a production environment. So there's some tools that are required from when you're starting your development to finally when you're doing your deployment. So it's like a journey of you as a DevOps engineer assisting the people involved when they are when they have a project, a development project. So remember, from the first end we have developers, and the far end we have operations team. So as a DevOps engineer, you should come in between them for you to assist in that journey all the way from when they start their development to finally when they are deploying the application in production. So I'll try as much as possible to give you like a continuous journey of a DevOps engineer from starting to end, and I'll give specific examples and specific scenarios. Then from there, you being if you're an aspiring DevOps engineer, that will have given you like a general overview of what a DevOps engineer is expected to know. Then you can build up from there, and look around for the specific tools that will probably work for you or work for the company that you are working for. Because remember, these are practices that can be applied anywhere. You can apply a different practice from another company. So I'll just give you like an overview or something that you can build upon for you to become a DevOps engineer. So yeah, so talking about DevOps, as I said, is a combination of two things. That's a development end and the operations end. So talking about the development end, remember here we're starting to build or to code an application, and the people who are doing that are the developers. So as a DevOps engineer, you should come in and assist the developers probably to get the platform that they'll be using to write their code. Remember, they're using a specific coding language, that's the programming language, and they also need a platform specific to that coding language that they're using. So as a DevOps engineer, if you have like an in-house infrastructure or whichever you have your infrastructure in, you should be able to help them to provision that platform for them to be able to start writing their code. So you should be able to understand the infrastructure, what your developers need for them to be able to start writing their code. So after that, once the developers have their platform, they have their language for coding, they're ready to start coding, then they should be able to collaborate. Remember, there could be many, maybe there are like 10 developers working on one project, and each developer has been given their different parts to work on. But at the end of the day, they should be able to collaborate. At least they should be able to see this is what my colleague has done, and this is maybe what I can add, what my colleague has done, or maybe suggest an additional something on what they have done. So there should be that collaboration. They should have like a tool for them to be able to control um, the result of their code. They should be able to have like a central place of putting their different codes so that they can all see that this is what my other team member has done. So that case, we need what we call a version control tool. And as a DevOps engineer, you should be able to understand the right version control tool for your developers so that you can help them to use that version control tool for them to be able to collaborate. And one of the most commonly used version control tools out here is Git. I'm pretty sure that you guys who are who are in the IT field understand how Git works. So Git is one of those commonly used version control tools, and I think it's really one of the best. I've used Git for some time, and I think that it's really one of the best tools to be able to collaborate when you're many developers working on a certain application. So with Git, the developers should be able to, push the code to GitHub. GitHub is now the repository for storing the code. So as a DevOps engineer, you should be able to understand how Git works and how GitHub works. Maybe to create repositories for your developers, for them to be able to push specific codes to the different repositories in GitHub. Maybe you can like segment that for people who are doing front end. Let me create for them a repository for front end, and for people who are doing back end, let me create for them like a repository for back end, depending on how you agree with your developers. But that's the work of a DevOps engineer, to be able to understand how Git works and be able to understand how to provision that Git environment and GitHub environment for the developers. So now once the developers have that version control tool, they should be able to collaborate with the rest of the team members and at least agree on this is what our code is finally going to be like. With Git, there are different commands that the developers can use to maybe pull the code from what the other person has done and push to GitHub. So another developer should be able to use like git pull to pull that code, maybe make some correction and push it back with some comment that this is what I have done. So the rest of the team should be able to see, oh, this is what my colleague did, and they added this comment for me to be able to understand what exactly they made as the changes in my code. So that is what a version control tool looks like, and I've talked about Git and GitHub being the mostly used version control tool out there, and that is one of the things that a DevOps engineer supposed to understand for him to be, or for her to be able to assist the developers to use it. So once the developers have their code in GitHub, remember GitHub is just a repository where they have put their code. The next step is for that code. Remember, guys, I said I'm taking you stepwise. For all that live the life, can I call it, life cycle of an application development. Now here we are focusing on a DevOps engineer. So once the code has been put in GitHub, remember the next phase of that code is to be able to build into an application and tested. So a DevOps engineer should also be able to understand what are some of the technologies that we can use, that my developers can use to build and test their code. And there's so many tools out there, but I'm also going to focus on one of the tools that's commonly used right now, and that tool is called Jenkins. Jenkins, I hope you've heard about Jenkins, and if you haven't, go online and search about Jenkins. It's a very, very nice tool for building and testing code. It's usually called a continuous integration and a continuous delivery tool. The reason why it's called a continuous integration and continuous delivery is because it facilitates that continuous building of code, building and testing of code. So there's so many functionalities of Jenkins, very, very nice uh, functionalities that can enable the developers to push their code now from GitHub to Jenkins in like an automated manner, depending on the scripts. As a DevOps engineer, you should be able to develop small scripts that can assist the developers to pull their code from GitHub to Jenkins, and also facilitate an automated testing and building and testing of that particular code. So as a DevOps engineer, you should be able to understand a tool like Jenkins, how it works from end to end. It has so many powerful functionalities that can bring an automated way of getting the code from GitHub and automatically building and testing. And you can actually see the process of building and testing your code in Jenkins once you have the proper scripts that can enable that automated pulling of code from GitHub to Jenkins and building and testing. So as a DevOps engineer, you're supposed to understand, really understand how Jenkins work, or whichever continuous integration tool that you decide to use. But in this case, I'm talking about Jenkins because I know it's one of the tools that are mostly used out there. So if you're a DevOps engineer, kindly try and understand Jenkins. And I know once you understand Jenkins, you should also be able to understand other tools out there. Or probably there's a tool that you very much used to. You can put it down there in the comment section. I know there are others like Cycle CI And there are even GitHub Actions that can also do the same work that Jenkins does. But as I said, guys, Jenkins is one of the powerful tools for continuous integration and continuous delivery that are being used out there. So in an overview, I can say it's a tool that enables you to automatically build and test your code that is coming from GitHub. So a DevOps engineer should be able to understand how a tool like Jenkins work and how to get the code from GitHub to be able to be built and tested in using Jenkins. And that's the process that we usually say or call continuous integration and continuous delivery. So once your your code has been built and tested using Jenkins, then the next step is definitely deployment. If you've agreed that your code is okay, you can deploy it. Then the next phase is deployment. And so for deployment, there are also other tools that can come handy for what we call continuous deployment. And in this case, you're supposed to understand as a DevOps engineer, where is my application going to be deployed at the end of the day? Yeah, is it going to be deployed maybe in an on-premise infrastructure? And if it's an on-premise infrastructure, what type of infrastructure? Are you going to deploy it in maybe virtual machines? And if it is virtual machines, do you understand what virtual machines are? Do you know how to provision a virtual machine? Do you understand what we call virtualization? And what kind of virtualization is your company using? We have different virtualization technologies. Is it something that is using like something like KVM? Is your virtualization environment using something like VMware, or is it using something like is it OpenStack based? So as a DevOps engineer, you're supposed to understand your in-house infrastructure where your application is going to be deployed finally. So from Jenkins, you're supposed to push your application now to the deployment environment. And that's what I'm saying. As a DevOps engineer, this is you will be really relied on to be able to assist that pushing of that application to a deployment environment. And that's why I'm saying you should be able to understand your deployment environment. What kind of an environment are you going to deploy your application in? So, as I said, is it an in-house infrastructure, or is it something that is hosted in the cloud? And is it your own cloud, or is it the public clouds, the likes of AWS or Azure and Google? So as a DevOps engineer, you're supposed to understand all that. And also depending on that environment, now when you narrow down to the server that the application is going to reside on, which kind of a server? And that's why I talked about, is it a virtual machine? Is it going to be like a Dockerized application? Is it going to be like a containerized application? So some of the things that you need to understand as a DevOps engineer, so that if you package, or if you build your code in Jenkins to be like a Docker image, that tells you that that code or that application will be deployed as a container, because Jenkins has the capability of building your code whichever way you want. So if you want to build it as an image, a container image, then that tells you that you will finally deploy it as a container. So do you understand the concepts of containerization? Do you understand the concepts of using Docker to build containerized applications? So these are some of the things that as a DevOps engineer is supposed to be at your fingertips, that you understand containers, you understand how containers work, you understand how to pull images, you know and run that image. Because if you build your application as a Docker image in Jenkins, then you probably push it to a Docker, an image repository. It could be your own private image repository, or maybe you push it to the public Docker Hub repository. So from then you're supposed to pull it and run it in the deployment environment. So if it was an image, a Docker image, then you run it as a container. And that's what I'm saying. As a DevOps engineer, they should be able to understand containers. You should be able to understand Docker, how to use Docker to run your applications. And if it's not containerized, if it's just being run on a maybe a Linux server, for example, then you probably need to understand the basic administration of Linux servers. The basic networking when it comes to working with Linux servers. So do you understand the concepts of IP addressing? Do you understand the concepts of ports? You need to open a port, or you need to close a port. Remember, this is probably a web application, so probably need to open some ports or close some ports. And also when it comes to a web application, which kind of a web server is it running on? So those are some of the things you need to understand. Is it running on Nginx web server? Is it running on something like, Apache Tomcat? So you're supposed to have that understanding. How do you even troubleshoot if it's an Nginx application? Are you able to troubleshoot an Nginx application? So you also need to understand web servers as a DevOps engineer. And another thing is, if your application is running in the cloud, which cloud is it? Do you understand if it's AWS? Do you understand if it's Azure? Do you understand how to deploy your application in Google Cloud, for example? And when you talk about cloud, remember now we're also going to narrow down to the specific server where your application is running. So if we talk about AWS, for example, are you just going to deploy it in an EC2? That is the virtual machine in AWS. So do you understand how to provision EC2s in AWS? Do you understand how to maybe do load balancing? Maybe your application is supposed to run uh, in a load balanced environment, because remember, there could be so many traffic coming to your server. So you decide, let me do maybe 4 servers and do like load balancing. So do you understand something like load balancing when it comes to AWS, or even on premise? Do you understand load balancing? And also something like it's going to be containerized and it is in a cloud environment. Do you understand using containers in the cloud? For example, if you talk about AWS, do you understand how to use, to deploy containerized applications in AWS? Do you understand the services that AWS gives us for us to be able to deploy containerized applications? Do you understand something like an ECS? That's the managed container service when it comes to AWS. Or if you're using like a Kubernetes cluster to deploy your application, do you understand how to create a Kubernetes cluster for you to be able to deploy your application, whether it's on premise or if it's in the cloud? Do you understand how to use Kubernetes to finally deploy an application? Do you understand how you can, create a cluster application maybe from scratch for your application to use it? And if it's in AWS, remember AWS give us, a managed service for a Kubernetes cluster, which is what we call EKS. So do you understand how to use EKS in AWS? So now the production part, where now you are assisting the operations people to deploy the production, depends on where you're deploying your application, and do you understand the infrastructure? It doesn't matter. Is it on premise? Is it on cloud? Do you understand the right infrastructure for you to be able to assist the operation guys to be able to deploy that application finally? And I've talked about so many things: Docker, virtual machines, cloud, things like Kubernetes cluster. So those are some of the things that should be able to come to your mind, because you can use any environment to deploy your application finally, but do you understand that environment? Do you understand web servers? Do you understand the basic Linux administration? you know so as a DevOps engineer, you're supposed to have those skills on your fingertips for you to be able to assist the operations guys to be able to deploy their applications. Now, after the deployment, whichever the platform that you've used for deployment, there's now the continuous maintenance. The operations guys will be able to be checking, the applications is working well. Do you have any issues? And if you have, when they realize there are issues, then they give them back to the developers for correction, and then the cycle continues. Like when it goes back to developers, it goes back to Git and GitHub, and then it goes back through the same cycle. So, and also monitoring. What kind of monitoring tools are you going to give your operations team for them to be able to monitor how the application is working? So as a DevOps engineer, you're also supposed to understand the right monitoring tools for your application that you've just deployed. So if it's a containerized application, I've seen that the mostly used monitoring tools includes things like Prometheus and Grafana, and so there are so many other monitoring tools. Of course, it will depend on your application. So, do you understand that one particular monitoring tool, and are you able to provision it for your operations team for them to be able to effectively monitor that application? And so, when there are issues, it comes back to developers, and then the cycle continues. So, as a DevOps engineer, you should always be there during the cycle for you to be able to realize, or rather to, come up with the best application that goes to the market. So yeah, that's like a journey of a DevOps engineer. I know I didn't like give everything. I just gave like an overview of some of the tools that are that are mostly used to assist DevOps engineers. But I know there are so many tools out there. There's so many practices out there for a DevOps engineer. But generally, that is the journey of a DevOps engineer. Yeah. So I hope that this has really helped you. If you have a comment, kindly put it down in the comment section and let me know. If you're a DevOps engineer, let me know some of the tools that you use. Let me know if you need me to talk about a specific tool that a DevOps engineer needs to understand. But generally, there are so many things that a DevOps engineer needs to know. Remember, these are practices and there are different tools that can be used to accomplish those practices. So as a DevOps engineer, you should always be like on the lookout, watching for the perfect tools for you to apply and for you to be able to at least help the developers and the operations team to realize production of the best applications to put out to the market. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And let me know. Let's have a discussion on this topic of DevOps engineer. Let me know if you're an aspiring DevOps engineer, and let me know what you've started learning at the moment. And we can assist each other from there and build one another. So until next time, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and share. Bye.